I'm Mohana Chatterjee, project lead of the Story Project 9 at www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Welcome you to the inaugural episode of the Dandakaranya series. I'm a student of history and currently pursuing my PhD on the partition refugees who were rehabilitated in the Dandakaranya region. Tell me your story calls for submission of poetry and short stories on the writing from Dandakaranya. Today's topic is the myth, travelogue of Ram Sita. Dandakaranya as a place is associated with various myths and mythological references, which eventually created a huge influence on its reality as well. That brings us to this panel discussion where we try to understand the myth and their impact on society today. I'm privileged to have with us Vikrant Pande, Gisa Jaehnichen, and Utkarsh Patel this evening. And I take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed panelists to the audience. Vikrant Pande has translated 13 Marathi books into English. His recent book, In the Footsteps of Rama, Travels with Raman, is being made into a travel serial. He wrote the SBI story, Two Centuries of Banking, which was received very well. Vikrant's translation, The Tatas, the family that built a business and a nation, got the Gaja Capital Best Biz Book Award in 2019. Vikrant resides at Vadodara. Professor Gisa Jaehnichen wears many hats. She teaches at Shanghai Conservatory of Music, chair of the ICTA Study Group of Musical Instruments, secretary of the IASA TNE committee, ambassador of IASA to Malaysia, Malaysia and China, vice president of the RILM Mixed Commission, and is a member of the DOC project. Utkarsh Patel is a lecturer of comparative mythology at the University of Mumbai and taught in many other institutes and colleges in India. He is also an author and has published three books and a TEDx speaker and also a regular speaker and lecturer on various subjects on mythology and other topics at various forums, lit fest, organizations and colleges. Now I invite Vikrant Pandey to share his insight on the topic. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening to those who are also tuned in. It was a fascinating journey when I wrote this book about Ram and Sita and Lakshman's travel from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka. It started with a question where I realized that most people, in fact, in India, did not really know, for example, where Chitrakoot was or where exactly people know Hampi, but they don't know Kishkinda. And this really surprised me that a lot of us who know about Ramayana, who are familiar with a lot of stories from Ramayana, did not really have an understanding of where these physical locations of these places. And that brought me the curiosity to actually go and visit, not only visit these places, but also try and discover stories which are probably not known or relatively unknown to most of us. And that took us, over a period of 1.5 years. We stayed in almost 15 or 20 different locations, staying in each place for an approximate a week, or in some cases like Sri Lanka for almost 2 weeks, traveling to different parts and talking to a lot of people. Dandakaranya was one very, very large region, and I'm talking specifically about Dandakaranya because that's the kind of topic for us today, where it's a very wide expanse and we could not cover many parts of it, primarily because if you look at the key stories which are associated with Dandakaranya, a lot of them are just about Ram, Sita, and Lakshman moving from one place to another. Of course, many of us will be familiar with the story of Raja Dandak, and then he was cursed because he tried to molest Brihaspati's daughter, because of which the entire forest was cursed. And Ram, Sita, and Lakshman walking through the forest kind of recreated that as they also went along, killing and eliminating some of the demons which were troubling the sages while they're trying to do the work. They spent a significant part of their Vanvas in Chitrakoot, and which is where from then they begin their journey into Dandakaranya, which is on the kind of eastern border of Dandakaranya, traveling all the way down to then to Panchavati, where they were suggested by Agastya Muni to go and reside because they told him that it was a beautiful place and where they could kind of stay for the rest of the time. But obviously, that became a turning point in Ramayana because that's where Shurpanakha comes in, and then Lakshman uh, cuts off her nose, and then the whole story of how Sita is kidnapped and everything happens. In Dandakaranya, of course, we found some interesting places like the Virat Kund, where Virat, who was a augur, was originally a Gandharva, Tumbaru or Tumburu, whichever way you pronounce that. And while he could not be killed, though Lakshman chopped off his arms, he was buried inside a pit, and then he was released from his augurship, and he went back to heaven as a Gandharva. There were other stories. We went to places which are associated with the Sutikshana Muni or with the Sharabhanga ashram. Today, it's difficult to find any evidence beyond sort of a belief that these are the places where these rishis resided. We went to the Lunar Lake, which is also called the Panchapsar. There are stories around that. In Nagpur, where Ram Tek is popularly called as a place where Lakshman and Ram rested for a while, which is why it's called Ram Tek. Before they eventually came to Panchavati, which is near Nashik, and which is where they stayed for a while. And then the entire episode of Shurpanakha getting insulted by Lakshman, then she calling her brothers, how Khara and Dushan were killed, and then Ravan invites Marich in the form of a deer to lure Ram away, and while Ram is away, Ravan comes and kidnaps Sita. So that's the broad expanse of Dandakaranya, which goes into a very very wide territory. There are stories all around. The people even in Odisha talk about Ram's presence. There's a Sita's kitchen everywhere. You see a lot of places where Ram performed Shraddh for his father. It was near Panchavati that he met Jatayu, and Jatayu explained to Ram how he was a friend of Dashrath, his father, and which is why Ram gives Jatayu the kind of uh, respect as he would have given his father. So even when Jatayu tried in vain to stop Ravan and uh, his wings were chopped off, Ram performs his Shraddh just the way his last rites, uh, like he would have done for his father. So he had a tremendous respect for him. So there are stories about Jatayu and how he introduces and tells about stories about how he and Dashrath knew each other for many years. So a whole lot of beautiful stories we gathered as we moved from Ayodhya right up to Panchavati. We did not get into a lot of interiors in Dandakaranya, which some of them are Naxal invested, parts of Chhattisgarh which were accessible, but we couldn't find any specific stories which could have been of interest to us. And our effort was to connect the place to the story. So we kind of skipped and moved from Chitrakoot, around Chitrakoot, and then to Lonar, Nagpur, and coming to Panchavati. So that was a part of our journey in Dandakaranya, Mohana.
Sir, thank you so much for your valuable insight. I found it especially interesting when you are talking about the stories of Jatayu. You just brought so many new insights. I was just not aware about these excellent stories. I'm really grateful to learn all this from you. Uh, Now I invite Gisa ma'am to share her valuable insight on the topic. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, can you share the screen?
Yeah, I do. I do. I hope you can see that all. Can you?
Yes,
Yes, we
ma'am, we
can.
can see it. It's coming.
You see, I want to talk a bit about Dandakaranya outside of that physical territory where it comes from. And I have I actually say the opposite of my uh, pre-speaker was focusing on the way through the forest, but I want to focus on what is in the mind of the people about the forest. Why did they forget the physicality, and they put it in their mind so strongly that it can be anywhere in the world. You see here scenes from the same thing as a dance in Laos. I was also working in Laos with people doing that. And here we see a Vientiane performance. We see the golden deer. We see Sita and Lakshman and Rama. And here we see the musicians playing. They observe opposite the stage the dancers and they play accordingly. And there is a specific repertoire, and that is what I was working about for a longer time. Why they play this one, and how they know where to change the mood, where to change the tune. And we see here the four most important persons, which also played a role in many other places. Here, for example, in Shanghai, we had a performance also with an Indonesian dancer played the Sun Wukong. What's that? That's Hanuman. And it was played with elements from a gamelan from Indonesia, and it was played with other instruments. And also in that time, when we performed parts of the Ramayana story, especially in Dandakaranya, with people from the Shanghai Conservatory. And we see that it's completely a different setting. We have Ravana here with a mask. We have the golden deer with a mask. But we have Rama as looking very modern and Sita also very modern. And here is one person who played the flower and the trees and the waterways. And we have Lakshman, here played by a woman, but actually could also be a man. So we see that Sita has a very expensive Gucci scarf and a very nice French hat, and that this guy has here he has a smartphone inside, and his pockets are full with cash and with credit cards. That is what a king looks like in China at the moment. So
Interesting.
a- and we had this writing on the ground, and the dancers were stepping along these letters to mark the place, Dandakaranya. And it was important to put this in that the dancers have known where to dance and how to mark the letters. It was very important to us. There are a number of terminology traps, like we say about they do that and they in that place where it comes from. But that is a past. It's a very long, long past, and we should always look to how it looks today. And if people forgot, then they still have it in their heart. They don't really forgot it. What do we safeguard? Do we safeguard the place? We safeguard the idea? What is usual? Often use this word usually, they do that and they safeguard that and that. So, and normally and usually are playing a big role in all narratives we have about Dandakaranya and what the true meaning is of it, and whether it is a dying culture to talk about. How should it be? So we have many traps, and we have to get rid of these traps and to talk about our relationship to Dandakaranya today and in the place we are. So that is already another question. I stop here sharing. I did not want to talk too much about that, but I wanted to say that in Shanghai we danced it, we played it also. We played the music that I had experiences from that with Lao stuff, and they play in every single place in every temple in another way. And the story is very long and has very many side stories, so never ending. And if you are in a forest, it's also never ending. You go in and then you are there, and that is your life. Thank you. I want to give the word back
Lovely.
to you,
Yeah.
Mohana.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Especially the pictures that you shared, they just open up a new horizon, like we have never looked towards Rama in such a way. Totally new perspective you opened in front of us. Thank you so much for this insight. I now invite Utkarsh sir to take the stage. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Right. Welcome, everybody. And I think Vikrant has highlighted quite a few lovely stories about the Dandakaranya region as such. And I think many of us already know quite a few things about Dandakaranya. So instead of talking about Dandakaranya per se here, I just want to bring up the aspect of forests. You know, in epics across the world, forest is a liminal space. You know, when we use the word liminal space, what we're trying to say is it's a space in between. You know, it's a space like a boundary or a threshold. Now, if you go by the Upanishadic traditions, a forest is a place where one goes to after one finishes his householder responsibility, and that's where it goes. But if you look at the epics, that's not how it is. In epics, our heroes, be it a prince or be it whatever, they go for a purpose. They go there, and that's where they are often tested. You know, the true metal, the true heroism, the true act of heroism comes out in a forest. Now, because the epic forest is kind of unfamiliar zone for humans, all the places are lurking with danger. Danger of unknown places, danger of rakshasas, danger of yakshas, gandharvas, what have you. One just doesn't know what to expect in the very next turn. And I think that's what makes a forest exile very, very interesting. Look at any epic, be it Mahabharat, be it Ramayan, be it even Gilgamesh. Actions happen in forest here. Now, this is also a place where the hero is questioned, where the hero is tested, and where the hero has to come out, really an expert and show his heroism in whichever form he does that. Take the case of Ram here. When Ram goes to the forest, he knows that the life of a forester is going to be very, very different. He literally prepares himself for his forest journey and for his forest stay. You know, he sheds his silk and he wears bark. He gives up his jewelry. He mats his hair. He literally spends a night outside the forest, with Guha, the Nishad king, spends time in meditation trying to understand what it is. And it's only after that that he enters into the forest. But the interesting aspect when it comes to Dandakaranya or when it comes to Ramayana is that though our heroes have taken up the garb of an ascetic, they haven't given up their Kshatriya code. They are still carrying the weapons. They are still carrying the weapons. And it is this contradiction which is interesting, which is actually what brings in all the changes, which brings in all the action. And there are two people who question Ram and Lakshman when they are carrying weapons, and that is both Virad, the demon that Vikrant mentioned, and Surpanakha later on, by saying, "Who are you guys? You guys look like an ascetic, but you guys have weapons." It is this contradictions, that is the garb of an ascetic and the weapons of a warrior, is what creates the contradiction. And perhaps it is this ambiguity that they portray in their appearance and in their conduct, which makes them vulnerable to attacks, which makes them vulnerable to the fact that there is no option but to use their weapons and thus expose themselves to violence. So, in my opinion, it is Dandakaranya which presents the epic, its main actions, main twists and turns. Also, the interesting episode of Virad, which Vikrant mentioned just now, is an interesting episode. It brings the hero's true character. Often we have seen, in celluloid especially, that Ram is absolutely okay to go to the forest and he's absolutely fine. He has no hard feelings against anybody, etc., etc. But the Virad episode, as portrayed by Valmiki, actually brings out the true human qualities of Ram. When Ram sees Sita perched on the on the waist of Virad, Ram is very upset. He's so upset that he actually gets angry. He breaks down and he curses the events which led them here, which is not something that we have always been told, that Ram was absolutely okay, no offense, no hard feelings against Bharat, no hard feelings against Kaikeyi. But here it brings us true, and he's angry, he's upset, he breaks down, and he says that this is what we have to face. This is so natural for somebody to be upset and angry about the whole thing. And again, it's the Dandakaranya which gives this element, which shows us this element of Ram being so human, with having human, convictions, having human feelings. And I think that's where Dandakaranya is an extremely interesting episode. And as I said, it's a forest which makes the whole thing so interesting. Yes, Mohana.
Thank you
Wonderful.
so much, sir, for your insight. You just brought a we are seeing Ram in a like human-like form. Normally, they are so much glorified that we sometimes lost the
Yeah.
human touch. So you just brought a totally new light to this aspect. Thank you so much. Now let's proceed to the question answer segment. So my first question is for Vikrant sir. Sir, will you please introduce us to other places or moments like Dandakaranya and its position in Indian mythology with reference to your book in the footsteps of Rama?
Oh, so there are, the entire journey from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka consists of a lot of places which really played an important role. As Utkarsh was mentioning, the Dandakaranya also brought out a very interesting episode of the Shurpanakha being insulted by Lakshman, because frankly, she was just propositioning to Ram, saying that I want to marry you because you're so beautiful, you're so handsome, and the way she was treated, there have been a lot of debates about the kind of actions which Ram and Lakshman took, where they actually almost sort of tease her, they insult her, and then eventually Lakshman cuts off her nose. That's again, as Utkarsh was talking about, saying that the human element comes out, where we see Ram and Lakshman not behaving in the staid manner. Of course, Ram, not Lakshman. Lakshman was always considered to be somebody who got very angry and was very emotional, but Ram was considered as someone who never displayed his emotions. And even after Sita is kidnapped, you see Ram very despondent, very, it's poignant the way Valmiki describes Ram's condition then, as someone who is tremendously suffering, till he meets Shabri, where she guides them to then go to Kishkinda, where they would meet Hanuman and Bali, Sugriv. And then the again another episode, which is a very controversial episode about the killing of Bali by Ram, because the question was it right? And so there are a lot of debates about why someone should interfere in the matter which was between the two brothers, and this person comes from nowhere and actually kills one of them. The very fascinating episodes of Kishkinda, and then the whole story of Hanuman trying to find where Sita is, and the travel from Kishkinda uh, to Rameshwaram, and we don't see much of events happening along that route till they reach Rameshwaram. And then in Rameshwaram, there are a lot of stories about appeasing to the sea god, trying to find a way to uh, reach Sri Lanka now that they've discovered that Sita is there. And then when they eventually reach Sri Lanka, the various places in Sri Lanka where Ram fights. It was very fascinating. I would like to mention one place specifically in the tea gardens where the battle was fought, where we actually found these tunnels inside the mountains by which Ravana's army could move from one mountain to another literally in a matter of a few minutes, which would otherwise take hours to go. And we actually entered one of those tunnels, and it was fascinating. We didn't go too far; we just went some 50 or 100 feet. But actually, we were told that if you go a few hundred meters, there's a lake inside, and then from there it gets connected to some other place. Similarly, we saw Ravana's cave in Yella. Those are fascinating places in Sri Lanka itself. The Koneshwaram temple in Trincomalee, where Ravana prayed. Uh, Beautiful places. And Sri Lanka itself has, surprisingly compared to India, actually created a very beautiful Ramayana circuit, where thousands of Indians actually are taken through the circuit, and they see this entire, which is actually a very small part of the entire Ramayana story. Now we find that the government has introduced a train which is taking people from Ayodhya to Rameshwaram. But the amount of places in Ayodhya, in Chitrakoot, Panchavati, Rameshwaram, especially if I mention these, and Kishkinda, these five places, they are not only worth a visit, but one would discover a lot of interesting stories around that. I'd like to mention one story which is a kind of a metaphor in our culture today of the Lakshman Rekha. And Utkarsh might correct me, but I found that in Valmiki or Ramcharitmanas or Kamba Ramayana, you don't actually see a reference of the Lakshman Rekha per se, the way it is described today in our the way we use it so liberally as a metaphor. Don't cross the Lakshman Rekha. Uh, Likewise, it's become a lore where we talk about कौन कहता है भगवान खाते नहीं बेल शबरी की जैसे खिलाते नहीं and the story of Shabri tasting the berry before she gives it to Ram again is these are stories which got added much later in our consciousness, and but they play an important role because they kind of take the story forward, and it's one of the ways of describing the emotion behind it. But when we researched, especially these three Ramayans of Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas, Valmiki Ramayana, and Kamba Ramayana, we don't see reference of these stories anywhere in that. There is a very minor reference of Lakshman Rekha in Tulsi Ramcharitmanas where Mandodari tells Ravan that, oh, you couldn't even cross a line or something like that. But there is no reference of that Lakshman drawing the Rekha in Panchavati and telling Sita, if you don't cross that, you're fine, and things like that. So it's been highlighted in a lot of TV serials and kind of now become a part of our metaphor. But those are fascinating stories which add to the whole lore of Ramayana. Yes, there are many places to visit, and uh, each of them are very different because they're different parts of the Ramayana story. The Ayodhya is about him being a king. Chitrakoot is where they just move after being banished to the forest. Dandakaranya, where they actually spend time in the forest. Kishkinda in search of Sita, and then Rameshwaram is about building the bridge and reaching Sri Lanka, and then the whole war in Sri Lanka. So fascinating stories there.
Thank you so much, sir. So my next question is for Jisa ma'am. Ma'am, will you please tell us about the identity of Dandakaranya outside the Indian subcontinent?
Okay, wait. Identity is, for me at least, a construction that includes complex expressions of religious and non-religious, mostly nationalist features. And of course, I know that it is needed at the moment. It is not the question of what it means outside, but for me, the question is always what is meant with inside. I'm not using this term anymore for this reason. I don't use identity. But of course, I know what is expected. Many people do not know about terminology and take it as a locally limited appearance. Therefore, I think Dandakaranya, the forest as a metaphor, is more important than the forest at the moment. I always speak about the current situation. Every religion claims of having their own travel stories, of which Dandakaranya is an important model. It is actually a model. It is not a real thing. I have this impression. The Lao story is full of differences, and it also shows differences in their stage presentation. So they dance differently in every region. The Chinese story of the journey to the West is again completely different. It is also differently told across Southeast Asia. I have even seen a modern musical in Malaysia where this story was partly danced, a thing of impossibility in Sri Lanka or Myanmar, that a monk can dance some. I wrote an article about how Dandakaranya was anticipated or, let's say, reinterpreted in China and in China today in an urban context. And I found out that while in the Valmiki Ramayana, the Dandaka forest is a strange and unknown wilderness, Rama, Sita, and Lakshman have to adapt to. In the current life of the students, it is a large metropolis of Shanghai that appears as an uncivilized wilderness with a lot of danger around. While in the Valmiki storyline, Ravana is representing the bad spirit who is challenging the pureness of love and loyalty. In the modernized story of these students, Ravana is the only wise and foresighted person. Ravana knows from the beginning how to reach his goals. He knows the vulnerable characters of the traditionally well-educated lawyers and acts without fear. For example, he knows that Sita, as a rich girl in a state of appreciating consumerism, wants to have the golden deer. He also knows that she will not hunt the creature herself, but she sends Rama to do his duty. Once a rich but unexperienced dandy, Rama, in the city it is a dandy, who first tries to bribe the deer with cash, get lost in the city jungle, Sita will send out Rama's best friend to find him. His best friend is Lakshman. Lakshman is, in the story of Laos, the brother of Rama and not a friend. The former poor classmate of Rama, in this case, is grounded enough to smell the danger. He also knows Sita's weaknesses, so he let her promise to not leave the hut. He encircles with magic dance, for he is going to rescue his rich friend. However, Ravana also knows that Sita is not very bright. She is so superstitious and superficially religious. He sends an eremit asking offerings to lure her out of her house. So she gets out of the magic hut and is finally kidnapped by Ravana. When Rama returns with Lakshman, Ravana refuses to fight after brightly testing the weak couple of fighters. He already reached his goal and is a winner in the story. This modification is also expressed in the layout of the dances and the outfit of the dancers. Only Ravana, the golden deer, and the eremit wear traditional clothing. Rama, Sita, and Lakshman are dressed in exactly what they represent. And that is all what I know about how it was outside of the area Vikrant was um, researching about. That I can say.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was really wonderful. So my next question is for Utkarsh sir. Sir, in what way does you think the myth associated with a place like Dandakaranya influences the pattern of our acceptance of that particular place?
Like I've said earlier, that forest is a liminal space, and it has its own rules. And like the rules of the city, doesn't apply here, but the forest still has its own rules. And this, I think, has been very well explained by Sita in the Valmiki Ramayana. Now, when in forest, Ram keeps getting calls to eliminate Rakshasas here and Rakshasas there. And he keeps jumping to the request and he goes there. And as an ascetic, which is not what he's supposed to do, but as I said earlier, being in the garb of an ascetic, but the role of a warrior, that's what he keeps doing. So Ram, though is in the forest, is unable to shed his, the Kshatriya code that he's been sort of so brought up to, and he has to go back to also. Sita goes on to kind of explain that the rules and the modes of behavior that are appropriate here in Dandakaranya, in the forest, are not the same which applied in the city. Now, this whole thing of this contradiction of the city versus the forest is continuously being brought out, in this whole thing. And the concept, which again, Sita explains, is that you were born with the Kshatriya dharma, right? The Kshatriya code that cannot provide a moral compass for action in the forests. You cannot carry the same logic that if I am called for a help in the city, I will go. Thus, if I am called for a help in the forest, I will go. Very clearly, she believes that the dharma of the city, or in the kingdom, let's put it this way, city or the kingdom, where the context of kingship, royal rivalries, palace intrigues, etc., does not work here. Now, she believes that the vow of the ascetic do not involve weapons and their use, and she's really worried about the amount of violence that Ram was exposing himself to by, at the beck and call of every sage who calls him and says, eliminate these demons here, eliminate that demon here. And here, Sita, and Sita's role in Valmiki Ramayana here in Dandakaranya comes up really very, very mature. She's an advisor here. She's not just, how we have seen, somebody who just walks behind Ram, as a shadow of Ram. But here she's a personality of her own. And here she actually tells Ram and, advises that, this whole thing that you drop off a hat, you drop everything and you want to go and say, kill the demons is a very, very bad idea. And how does she impress upon him? She tells him an interesting story about a young sage who's practicing penance in the forest, and he found a sheathed sword in front of him. And of course, this was left by Indra to disturb his penance. The ascetic touched it, and felt thrilled. The next time he unsheathed it, touched the shining blade, and it kind of thrilled him, right from inside. Then he went and sliced a small branch, and the way it moved and, sort of struck it, he was impressed. And then he went on and on from a branch to a stem to a tree and this led him at one point of time to go killing randomly. Soon, he was under the spell of the sword and the power it gave to him. He forgot all about his penance. Sita cautions Ram in the same way, saying that don't come in the spell of weapons and don't come in the spell of this mindless violence that you are doing. Power, is a tool that enables user to exercise control over beings, and temptation, it literally will call forth you to the negative forces here. So this whole thing about, how Sita cautions and how brings out this whole aspect of, shun violence, don't give in to this whole thing about violence is an interesting episode here. And needless to say, that Sita tries to convince Ram about the appropriateness of his behavior of Dandakaranya. But Ram is not influenced by it, which leads to the actions and, what follows, as we have seen in the entire episode. So, it's very important, that you accept the place the way it is and not try to change it. When you try to change it, then you have a Ramayana as we just saw. Yeah.
Wonderful. Very good.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Mohana.
Is there screen frozen, I suppose? It looks like that.
Looks like that.
That's a very interesting point you brought about Utkarsh, that Sita's role and Ram's kind of endless violence is really something which came to the fore in
Dandakaranya. That's what Dandakaranya, that's how Dandakaranya actually becomes very, very interesting. And especially in Valmiki Ramayana, where Sita does have a role. Sita does have a very, very strong personality, which we don't find in the subsequent versions thereafter.
In Ramcharitmanas, she's more of a docile wife who is following. Absolutely. Whereas in Valmiki Ramayana, she's a warrior princess. I mean, she can take care of herself. Yeah.
She can take care of herself. She has a mind of her own. She's an advisor. She can, kind of argue. Those are interesting points, and that makes the character more believable. That's very interesting, that characters are more believable that way.
That's right.
Yes, Mohana.
Thank you so much for your insights, sir. So my next question is for Vikrant, sir. Myth, the word is understood as a belief of a community. How do the stories of Indian mythology contribute to the history of the country?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, because as somebody, I think it was Yuval Noah Harari who said that it's a collective fiction that defines us. The human history is, to quote him, all about ever shifting alliances, beliefs, myths, and cultures. So I do believe that myth plays a role in contributing to the oral tradition. If you look at Ramayana and Mahabharata in India, we call them itihas because that's the way they happened. But a lot of these stories which we spoke about, like the Lakshman Rekha or the Shabri tasting the fruit before giving it to Ram, could be under sort of a myth or a story which got created. But in the oral tradition, they become very important because they help us to understand a concept. Like in Shabri's case, it's the concept of pure love, devotion. And Ram understands that very well in the story which is told so popularly. The Lakshman gets upset that how can you give something which is already tasted? And Ram is explaining, saying you're not seeing the love or the devotion beyond it, behind it. So the stories or mythology help to take an ideology forward, because history is not so much about facts but also about beliefs. I translated uh, Ranjit Desai Shriman Yogi, where Shivaji is an icon in Maharashtra, and there are as many beliefs about Shivaji as there are facts. And if you try to tell a story which is only based on facts, it's a history which is not, it's not about being not palatable, but not really mesmerizing, inspiring, and making people do certain things because they get inspired by the icon like Shivaji. And I think the same applies to when we look at Ramayana, when we look at any mythology which is helping, like philosopher uses a mythology to add to his reasoning. They are called as charmers, which are welcome additions to his reasoning because they help to take his reasoning forward. So I do believe that there is a very strong place for what one might call a sort of a concocted story or a story which is created, or somebody might call that a myth. If it is helping the tale to in the storytelling, if it is helping the ideology to be taken forward, a lot of stories in Ramayana, if you look at, might sound very odd. Utkarsh was talking about the sword which an ascetic used. There is a story about that Kal Khadga, which uh, the one of Ravan's commanders had, but the sword realizes that I need to be with Lakshman and I am in the wrong place. So the sword itself chooses its the person with whom it should be, and it comes back to Lakshman. So, I mean, so in today's times, this might be considered myths, but if you look at it philosophically, it's like saying that the teacher arrives when the student is ready, the weapon goes to the right person to whom it actually should belong to. So, I strongly believe that the myth reinforces ideologies, and history is a combination of beliefs and facts. And the beliefs, like if you look at the concept of India itself, and I'm not getting too much philosophical here, the concept of Bharat or India is a lot about belief than just some geographical boundaries which you can draw and say that this is what Bharat stands for, this is what India stands for. So that's where I believe that history, myth plays or beliefs play a very important role.
Thank you so much, sir. So my next question is for Jisa ma'am. Ma'am, when you read about the travel load of Ram, Sita, and Lakshmana, what were some of the crucial thoughts that may have crossed your mind?
Some of the crucial thoughts that may have crossed my mind when being confronted with the travel law are first, that the model of the story is present in every single place on earth where people are living. It is only a question of time to reinterpret all these many different versions into one standard story. The globalization and also the claim situation coming with it is possible, unavoidable. And opposite also, the standard version will always be localized and then presented as diverse. We may start to count the cycles rather than telling the mystic or mystified contents. So we will always tell a story about the travel in the forest and as an opposition to something existing and then going local. And then from that local, it will become again global, a standardized version, and then it will be related back to the local conditions. But the more also it is important to collect the different ideas and keep them for coming generations to decide about their reinterpretation and about their use. Dandakaranya as a travel story is to reflect on one's own life as well. I traveled many countries and worked in many places. Life is full of surprises and options to help or to destroy. We all need to be more careful and better listeners to each other. And I'm very inspired by this session. The displacement is relative. That is also something that crossed my mind. Although Rama is destined to be the king of the future, it is not advisable to exclude his experiences among all these uncertainties from future wisdom. So everything he learned in the forest will help him to be a good king. We also should consider this. That crossed my mind.
Very nice. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am. Thank you
interesting.
so much. So my next question is for Utkarsh sir. Sir, how much importance do you think the modern generation pays to age-old myths and mythology? Can we call them a generation with an open mind, or they are still bound by the old myths and traditions?
Well, I am not sure our modern generation is taking too kindly to our age-old myths, to be very honest with you, and that might be because that might be because the way our age-old myths have been projected, spiritual, religious, touch me not. Now, world over, and also in ancient India, not just world over, even in ancient India, the philosophy of anything, any learning was to question. We start with a question. Now, our epics have taught us the very idea of question and debate. It was open. In Dashrath's court, he had people of every acumen. Not only that, he even had somebody who was an absolute Gnostic atheist. He didn't believe in God, he didn't believe in anything. And the logic that Dashrath had was that what if I get somebody who's committed some crime or some mistake and he doesn't believe in God? Who will be able to judge him? Now, that's the kind of an ancient India we are referring to. That's the kind of world that we were talking about, which allowed questioning. Doesn't mean that the epic is going to give you answers of all of them. No, it might not give you an answer. For example, take an interesting example. When Kaushalya tells Ram not to go to the forest, Ram says that no, I will go to the forest because it's my responsibility to my father that I honor his word. And that's when Kaushalya tells Ram, that's your responsibility to the father. What about your responsibility to the mother? The mother is telling you don't go. How is it that you're giving priority to the father's wishes but not to the mother's wishes? Now, here, Ram doesn't have an answer. He doesn't have an answer, he goes. But remember, Valmiki has left a question for all of us here. That there is a question. Maybe Ram didn't have an answer. Maybe every another generation might be able to give you an answer. But what have we done? What we have done is we have shunned the very idea of raising a question. And I think that is where the problem is. Remember, epics were not there, as I said earlier, not there to just give you answers. They were there to raise a question, and every generation has to find his or her own answer. Simple example, you read Ramayana at the age of 20s and you read Ramayana again at the age of 40s, you will realize that you had missed many things when you were 20. And then back again in 60, if you read, you'll get new wisdom, which you probably missed it. That's what an epic does, and that's what our ancient epics have done. But you see, the problem is we do not like questions, and we do not want the new generation to ask us questions. So, we normally tell them, don't ask questions. These are the ways of God. And we are only pushing them back from reading our own myths and epics. Our new generation does have an open mind. Okay, they are willing to explore it, and I think those who have wrapped these epics with a touch me not fabric are actually the problem. Let this generation question. Let them debate and find their own answers, like we all did. right? We all found our own answers. We all found something important in Ramayana and every other epic. Let this generation allow them to debate, question. There is no harm. If Kaushalya can question Ram, if Surpanakha can question Ram, if Sita can question Ram, why can't anybody else question? And just before I hand over, there's this interesting version which I must bring here, is from the Vainad Ramayana. Vainad Ramayana is a tribal Ramayana, and just one small episode that when everything is over and Ram has found Sita back after banishment, love Kush and everything, and Ram tells Sita, okay, let's go back to whatever's happened. Let bygones be bygones, and you come along with us, and you stay with us in the palace, not just love and Kush. So Sita says, okay, fine, let's go. And she's about to walk along with them when suddenly Sita stops. And Sita says, "Ek minute, I have a question." So Ram says, what? He says, do you give me guarantee that when another guy casts aspersions on my character, you won't throw me out again? Now, see, even the version of Ramayana is questioning Ram. That's the best part of the epic. It allows you to question. If you allow your generation to question, find their own way in it, trust me, the new generation will take to Ramayana, and they'll not just keep running to Norse and Greek mythology. They will study your epics also. Yeah.
I also believe, Utkarsh, that you find, like Koral has written, the interpretation of some of the women from our epics, that
Right.
today's generation is enjoying these
Absolutely.
interpretations of Ramayana. And as you beautifully said, each age when you read Ramayana or Mahabharata, the interpretations and meanings are so different when you read at 20 and when you read at 40 and 60. Uh, you-
Absolutely.
like Rabindranath Tagore's poems in childhood are
Yeah.
group songs. In teenage, they are love songs, and then they become devotional songs at the age of 50 or 60.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
true. Absolutely. So true.
So my next question is for Vikrant sir. Mythology sits between religion and philosophy. How do you think these two branches of study make a difference in the storytelling that traveled across ages? Over to you, sir.
Yes, I did allude to it in my earlier, comments, that it's kind of sits in between religion and philosophy. And as I read somewhere, that a philosopher uses these, mythology as kind of charmers to add to his reasoning. Because when you're trying to explain a concept to someone, oftentimes you need to take the help of a story, which you might call a mythology, because it probably explains the concept in a better manner. Like, how do I explain pure devotion? But when I tell the story of Shabari, uh, the meaning becomes clearer to a layman. Oh, that's what pure love is about. That, and that's what the love for Ram as well is, that he does not see Shabri despoiling the fruit, but he sees the love behind the act. And so, while it's a philosophical comment about love, it is expressed through storytelling. And that's what makes mythology interesting, because it allows religion and philosophy. Uh, it sort of, in many cases, it creates a bridge to allow, uh, as Utkarsh was saying, the purpose of Ramayana is to allow us to question, to ask questions about, not treat Ram as a god, especially in Valmiki Ramayana, but as someone whom you can question and find your own answers to. And these myths, or some of the stories inside the larger story, help you to be able to ask those questions. So I do believe that mythology plays a very important role, where we are trying to take an ideology forward, a belief forward, a concept forward, and it just makes it easier for someone to not only accept, but to be able to understand that part better.
Thank you so much, sir. So my next question is for Gisa, ma'am. Ma'am, how does mythology of one region create an impact on the social reality in various other regions of the world?
In a moment, I have to find your cover. I hear. Can you repeat the question in small parts again?
Sure, ma'am. So my question is, how does mythology of one region create an impact on the social reality in various other regions of the world?
Mythology is also a construction, more or less. It is a compound in myself that I think it is like that, and there exists a code common to many people around me, having the same code and interpreting similar in a similar way. Therefore, we have this physicality of thoughts, and that it appears to us that, let's say, Ravana lived Sri Lanka, which is not proven. I have to say it is a beautiful area, and we can travel there, but I'm not really sure that it was there. There are also other places that could be the place, like
Right.
Langkawi. Yeah, it's also Lanka, and but this construct in the brain, this philosophical translation in what it means to us, that has a big impact on how people make use of the story and make use of their own travel story. So they take the whole ancient story as a model and they go along. That was nicely executed by Vikrant Pande. He really did it and he wants to present it. And the main, I think once he started to do that, he believed that it's necessary, but maybe now it is maybe different. And you may see the need is much more to be to be open to every surprise. And that is how life is. Life, you must be open to any surprise. And if Utkarsh Patel says we don't like questions today, then we have to ask ourselves, why is it like that? And where is it like that? It's not everywhere in the world like that. So who is the one who is asking questions? What about? And that is all playing a role in that. And it is also based in a mythology. We recreate this mythology with everything we do. It is not limited to an ancient prescription or narration. So we do it all the day long, again and again and again. It's not only that we change our reading patterns, we also change our personality. And that is important to know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all I want to say about that.
Absolutely.
True.
You want to add to it, Utkarsh, uh,
No, I think
on
she
how?
is.
Yeah, Mona, you're back. Yeah.
Yes. So my next question is for Utkarsh sir. Sir, there are many elements of magic, realism, and fantasies in myth. How should a modern reader interpret these or them with reference to their own realities?
Well, it's a simple thing. The modern reader should interpret it exactly the way the author intended to be, magic and fantasy, right? I mean, why do we think that our ancient writers were, not capable of fantastic or magical elements? While I'm not denying the aspect of metaphors and allegories in the narratives, often this is our interpretation, the modern reader who interprets in allegorical and metaphorical manner. Flights of fancy is not the domain of the likes of J.K. Rowling only, right? I mean, our ancient writers too had them and might have become a bit of a realism later. But for them, it could just have been that magic and fantasy. Now, if the modern reader sees them exactly as it is, I think our narratives and texts, will get their due, and I think more people will accept them as texts worth reading. Trying to portray that all one reads is real, except for the fact that the world missed it for a good few brief centuries, and then the West discovered it all over again, and we keep patting our backs that we did it. I think that's where we're making a very very big mistake, and that is why I think our kids would prefer not to read our text and go to Percy Jackson and the likes of that, instead of reading Rama and Mahabharata, which are equally, if not more, interesting, complicated texts. I just feel, let the young generation interpret the way they see it. Let's not even tell them how to interpret. Let's not even tell them. I mean, who told us what to read? And that's going to affect. It won't affect the texts at all. Let me be. From time immemorial, authors and bards have interpreted it the way they wanted to, right? Changed episodes, added characters, questioned certain characters. Like he said that, one of the like there is no Shabri in certain cases, there is no Lakshman Rekha in certain case, there is no certain character, there is enhancement of a character. Like Urmila has no major role in Valmiki Ramayana, but when you go to Telugu version, Urmila is a character in herself. Has this kind of change affected our texts at all? It's not. From time, everybody's been, tinkering along with it, playing around with it. Nothing has affected our tests. Why are we so worried now? So I just feel you should treat the text as it is, not give it a halo behind it, and make it ultimately touch me not. Is something I just feel.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I would like to thank everyone. Thank you everyone for your very insightful conversation and your time this evening. Tell Me a Story calls for submission of poetry and short stories on the writing from Dandakaranya. We will return with our next panel discussion very soon. Till then, stay well, stay safe, stay happy. Good night.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much for the very
Thank you.
erudite Utkarsh and
Thank you
Gisa.
so
It was
much.
lovely. Yeah.
Same.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, both of you. It
Thank
was
you for this
Thank
it's
you,
good to
inspiring.
hear
Vikrant sir,
in a
Gisa
different
ma'am.
voice.
Yeah. Bye bye.
It
Thank
was
you.
really great. Thank you.